2:07 a.m. The copper tang wouldn't wash out with the bleach. It clung to the air of the ER like it had decided to stay permanently. There was a curtain drawn completely closed at the end of the row of beds. In a place where privacy was a luxury nobody had the space to afford, that curtain was the first wrong thing. Behind it, a man in an expensive white dress shirt sat motionless, one hand pressed flat against his left side, where blood had soaked through from the fourth button down to the hem. Two men in black suits flanked him. Sunglasses. At 2 in the morning, he hadn't come here to be saved. He'd come to find someone. And the nurse about to pull back that curtain had no idea that in the span of just 40 minutes and 17 sutures, her entire life would turn down a road with no way back. Some cuts run so deep they never truly heal. They only learn to hold. The night shift at St. Cross always smelled the same. Antiseptic, old coffee. Something metallic underneath that never quite washed out no matter how many times you scrubbed your hands raw at the sink between patients. Nora Vane knew that smell the way she knew her own heartbeat. Automatic. Unavoidable. 3 years of double shifts and it had soaked into her skin, her hair, the weave of every scrub top she owned. She'd stopped noticing it the way you stop noticing the sound of traffic outside your window. Background. Constant. Just the texture of where she was. Tonight it was stronger. She noticed that first, before anything else registered. The copper tang riding heavy under the bleach. Clinging to the recycled air of the ER like it had decided to stay permanently, like it had unpacked. She told herself it was nothing. She was wrong. 2:07 a.m. Friday, leading into Saturday, the way Fridays always did in this place. Not with any ceremony. Just a digital clock ticking over, and the waiting room still full, and the coffee still bad and nobody going home. Nora stood at the nurse's station with a cup she'd stopped tasting somewhere around hour 12. Her shoulders ached in that specific way that came from hunching over gurneys too long. A different ache from the one that came from lifting. This one was about compression, about making yourself smaller to fit into the space the work required. Her feet had stopped complaining an hour ago, which was not a good sign. When feet go quiet like that, it's not because they feel better. It's because they've run out of ways to ask for help and given up on the project entirely. $312. That was the number sitting in the back of her mind, like a splinter she couldn't reach. $312 in her checking account as of that morning. Rent due in 3 days, $1,400 she didn't have arranged anywhere, and Baltimore. Margaret, her grandmother, the woman who had taught her to make biscuits from scratch and do crossword puzzles in pen and never apologize for taking up space. Margaret's care facility had sent another reminder about the monthly supplement $400. Every third of the month, without exception, even when the math made no sense. Even when Nora ate peanut butter sandwiches for dinner 4 nights running, because peanut butter was $3.349 and lasted. She didn't think of it as sacrifice. She thought of it as the only thing she was still getting completely right. Dr. Harmon materialized at the edge of her vision the way he always did. Not quite appearing, just suddenly present, as if he'd been standing there for some time and she'd only just become aware of him. 50s, perpetually exhausted in a way that had moved past tired into something more fundamental, more structural, like his bones had accepted it. The kind of man who'd stopped making sustained eye contact sometime around his 3rd decade in emergency medicine. He slid a chart across the counter without looking up from his phone. Bay 4. Male, deep laceration, left lateral thorax. Possible GSW, but the wound patterns inconsistent with the bullet entry. Refusing to see a physician, Nora picked up the chart. Sparse. Almost aggressively sparse. A birthday, a blood type. Nothing else. Refusing how, politely. Harmon finally glanced up. Something moved across his expression, something she couldn't immediately name. Not concern. More like a careful distance, very politely. Get him cleaned up and out. Waiting rooms backed up past the door. He walked away before she could ask the follow-up question. She gathered supplies. Saline, sterile gauze, suture kit, antiseptic. The automatic choreography of 1,000 identical nights. Her hands finding things without her having to look for them. She'd done this enough times that her body had its own knowledge, separate from whatever her mind was doing at any given moment. Bay 4 was at the end of the row. Curtain drawn completely closed. That was the first wrong thing. Not wrong like dangerous, just wrong like unusual. Privacy in this ER was a courtesy they couldn't structurally afford. The curtains stayed half open by default. They just did. Space was too tight and need was too constant for anything else. Nora knocked twice on the metal frame. "Hi there. I'm Nora, your nurse tonight." Silence. Not empty silence, the other kind. The kind that has something actively behind it. The kind where the absence of sound is itself a communication. She pushed the curtain back 6 inches and stopped. 3 men occupied the small space. 2 of them stood flanking the gurney with a geometric precision that wasn't accidental. Identical black suits, despite the August heat that the hospital's overtaxed AC was losing the argument against. Hands clasped in front of their bodies. Posture rigid in the practiced way of people who'd been trained to hold positions. Sunglasses. At 2 a.m. Under fluorescent hospital lighting that was unkind to everyone and flattering to no one. The third man sat on the edge of the bed, right hand pressed flat against his left side, where a white dress shirt, expensive, the kind that has a thread count someone chose deliberately, had soaked through with red from the 4th button down to the hem. His jacket was folded on the chair beside him, neatly, with care. Like violence was something that happened to other people's clothing, and he simply wasn't going to participate in that particular tradition. He was looking directly at her, not at the doorway where she'd appeared, not at the room around her, at her, with the focused attention of someone who had already been watching the space where she would appear before she appeared in it. Like he'd known the geometry of her arrival, pale eyes. The color of a frozen lake in February, not the blue of sky or water, but the specific blue of ice, which is blue because of what it's containing. Sharp jaw, dark hair swept back from a high forehead with the kind of deliberateness that suggested it was always this way, not just tonight. A face that had learned to be handsome the hard way, not from ease or comfort, but from the kind of sustained discipline that leaves marks. He said, "I requested a physician," low voice. An accent she couldn't immediately categorize. Eastern European. Maybe. Or something older than any specific geography. Smooth in a way that had texture underneath it, the way expensive whiskey is smooth but isn't simple. Nora stepped fully through the curtain. Let it fall closed behind her, I understand. But I'm what's available right now, and I'm fully qualified to treat lacerations. The 2 suited men looked at each other. A quick exchange, loaded. One of them began, "Sir, perhaps we should leave us 2 words. Quiet as anything, but the kind of quiet that doesn't invite interpretation." The suited men were outside the curtain in 4 seconds flat. No argument, no negotiation, no visible hesitation. Just gone. Like words from this man carried a different gravitational weight than words from other people. Nora stood alone with the bleeding man. Her shoulders had stopped aching. Strange how that happens. Trade one kind of tension for another, and the body reprioritizes. Stops complaining about the old thing. Has a new thing to process. "I need to see the wound," she said. He watched her for a moment. The way you watch something you're still making a decision about. Then he started unbuttoning his shirt with one hand. The other stayed pressed against his side. His name was in no chart she'd been given. She noticed this as she worked. The sparse notes Harmon had pushed across to her contained a birthday 34, 4 months past, and a blood type. Nothing else. No address. No emergency contact listed. No insurance information. No last name. The absence of information she was already understanding was its own category of information. She peeled back the fabric where it had begun to dry and stick against his skin. The wound beneath was a clean slice, 4 inches, maybe fractionally more, running parallel to the 4th and 5th ribs on his left side. Deep. Not deep enough to have reached anything internal. She checked for that first, her fingers moving carefully, methodically, feeling for what shouldn't be there. But deep enough that every breath he drew was pulling the edges wider next to it. An older scar, puckered and silver pink in the harsh light. The shape that bullet wounds make when they've healed without surgical correction. At least 2 years old. Maybe more. This man had been shot before, and had not appeared in any hospital record for it, or had appeared somewhere she would never have access to. "This needs sutures," she said. "How did it happen? Does it matter for treatment?" Knife wounds and broken glass carry different bacteria. It affects the infection risk and the antibiotic protocol. Knife, a pause of exactly 2 seconds. Measured, a very clean knife. She absorbed this, opened the antiseptic. Soaked a pad. This will sting. He didn't flinch, didn't blink. His breathing stayed measured and controlled as she cleaned the wound edge. His eyes tracked her face the entire time. Not her hands. Not the needle she was preparing. Her face, she found that more unsettling than the blood. She reached for the local anesthetic. I don't need that. Not a preference. Not a request. A statement of fact delivered without inflection. She looked at him. He looked back. She set the syringe aside. Threaded the curved suture needle. Then this will hurt considerably more. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. The ghost of an expression that had decided not to fully commit. Payne and I have a long acquaintance. She made the first stitch. He didn't move. At all. 17 sutures. She counted them the way her grandmother had taught her to count stitches in fabric. Not as numbers but as rhythm. Even. Consistent. Each one the same tension as the last. Not too tight, which cuts off blood supply and delays healing. Not too loose, which lets the edges separate. Margaret's voice went in the back of her memory. You're not just closing something, child. You're making it hold. Nora had learned to sew before she could write her own name in a straight line. Pillowcases. Hemlines. The torn ear of a stuffed rabbit named Gerald that had survived 6 childhood homes and 3 moves across state lines and was currently sitting on the nightstand in her studio apartment, with the repaired seam still holding 30 years later. She'd never told anyone about Gerald. Not once. Your technique is precise, the man said. His eyes still on her face rather than her hands. Still watching the thing he'd decided to watch. My grandmother was a seamstress. She taught you. Before I started school, Nora tied off the 10th stitch. Even tension. She probably didn't imagine I'd use the skill like this. Life rarely follows the map we draw for it. The observation landed somewhere she hadn't expected it to. She kept her eyes on the wound. No, she said. It doesn't. They were quiet for a moment. One of those silences that doesn't feel empty, that has substance. She was on stitch 14 when he spoke again. Casual. Conversational. The register of a man commenting on the weather outside. Your grandmother. Margaret. Lakewood Care Facility in Baltimore. You send her $400 on the 3rd of every month. Nora's hand stopped the needle half an inch from his skin. She looked up at him. He looked back with the same expression he'd worn since she pulled the curtain. Calm. Patient. The look of someone delivering information rather than a weapon, even in the cases where the information is, functionally, the weapon. You investigated me. I investigate everyone who comes into contact with me. I'm your nurse. I was assigned by. I know how you were assigned. Harmon pulled short straw rotation. You'd been planning to clock out 20 minutes earlier, but the overnight aide didn't show, and you don't say no when they're short-staffed. A pause. Unhurried. You haven't said no once in 11 months. The room felt smaller. Measurably, physically smaller, Nora became aware of her pulse in a way she normally wasn't. Steady. A little elevated. The way it got when adrenaline started making choices on her behalf. She looked back at the wound. Place stitch 15. Even tension. You know how much I have in my checking account. $312. As of yesterday morning. And you're telling me this because I want you to understand that I don't do anything by accident. He let it sit for exactly 1 second, including being in Bay 4 tonight. Stitch 16, stitch 17. She tied the final knot with the same tension as all the others. Trimmed the ends, set the needle down. Then she looked at him directly. I'm going to apply a sterile dressing. Keep it dry for 48 hours. Change the dressing daily. No activity requiring torso rotation for at least 1 week. Sutures come out in 10 days. You should see a physician for follow-up. I won't. I know. She reached for the bandage. I'm telling you anyway. He was standing by the time she finished taping the dressing edges. Moving carefully. Not wincing, but deliberate in a way that meant the pain was present, and he was simply choosing not to give it public acknowledgement. He shrugged back into his shirt, buttoned it with one hand, then reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. A money clip, substantial, the kind that doesn't advertise itself. He counted out bills and held them toward her. Hundreds. She counted without meaning to. 1, 5, 10, 20, 25, $2,500, he said, for your time. And your discretion. She stepped back. I can't accept cash from patients. Consider it a consultation fee. That's not. She stopped. Because the word discretion had landed and was sitting in the room with them now. and she understood precisely what it encompassed. No incident report. No chart notation about the nature of the wound. No phone call to the police. No mandatory reporting form checked for what was obviously an intentional injury from a third party. She knew the protocol, had reviewed it 6 weeks ago in the annual compliance training. She knew exactly what she was legally required to do next. He didn't say anything else. Held the money out with the patience of someone for whom the outcome was not in question, only the timing of her arrival at it. The $312 in her checking account, Margaret's reminder, the rent in 3 days. Nora took the money. She felt its weight and slid it into her scrubs pocket, and she did not look at him while she did it because she didn't want to see what was on his face. Whether it was satisfaction or contempt, or the thing worse than both, understanding. She turned back to clean the tray. Sutures out in 10 days, she said. To the middle distance. Redness or warmth at the wound edges means infection. Fever above 100.4, same thing noted. If you develop fever, shortness of Nora. She stopped. He'd used her name, and she hadn't told him her name. It was on her badge, yes. But the way he said it didn't sound like someone reading a badge. It sounded like someone who'd already known it and was using it for the first time. She turned. He was looking at her with something she couldn't put in a category. Not gratitude. Not warmth exactly. More like recognition. The look of someone who has found the thing they were searching for and is now in the stage of deciding what to do about having found it. You look exhausted, he said quietly. Go home. Rest. And then he was gone. The curtain swung closed behind him. She heard nothing after that. No footsteps, no elevator, no doors opening or shutting. Just the ambient noise of the ER coming back around her like water, filling a space that had briefly been displaced. She stood in Bay 4 for approximately 40 seconds. Then she went back to work. She found the $2,500 again at 4 a.m. during a bathroom break. Her hand went into her pocket, and there it was. Real, substantial. She'd half convinced herself somewhere between patience that she'd constructed the entire encounter out of exhaustion and suggestion. The pale eyes. The suits. The needle going in 17 times and him not moving once. The money was not a construction. She finished her shift at 5:50 a.m. The morning was that particular shade of gray that belongs to the hour before the sun commits to anything. Cool. The specific coolness that happens when the city hasn't fully pressurized yet. The air smelled like damp concrete and something green from the park 2 blocks over, 15 blocks to her apartment. She usually took the bus. This morning she walked. She needed the processing time. The kind you can only access when your feet are moving and you're not required to do anything else simultaneously. She made it 2 blocks. That's when she noticed the SUV, black, windows tinted past what the law technically permitted, moving at exactly her walking pace along the parallel street. Not quite keeping up, not quite falling behind, just maintaining the interval, like an escort that hadn't announced itself as one. Her stomach dropped in a clean, immediate way. She kept walking. Same pace. Didn't look at it directly. Used her peripheral vision. 1 block. 2. The SUV held the distance. Her building came into view at the end of the 3rd block. 5 stories. Brick that hadn't been cleaned since before she was born. A security door with a lock that had been broken since considerably before that. She walked faster. The SUV pulled ahead. Stopped at the curb half a block up. Nobody got out. She hit the security door, got it open, took the stairs instead of the elevator. 4 flights. Her lungs were burning by the 3rd. She reached her floor, got her door open, got inside, locked it. Chain, both deadbolts. She went straight to the window. The SUV was still there, and while she stood watching, a second one pulled in behind it and parked with unhurried precision. She lay on her futon and stared at the water stain on the ceiling that looked like a map of somewhere she couldn't identify. The $2,500 sat on the coffee table. She'd put it there without deciding to. Just needed it out of her pocket and into a place she could see it. She hadn't touched it again. She thought about Owen. She didn't intend to. She never intended to. 3 years of active effort to keep thoughts of him at the workable edges of her consciousness rather than the center, and mostly it worked, and then sometimes it didn't. The money on the table and the SUVs on the street and the 17 sutures she'd placed in a man who wouldn't give his name. It broke through what she'd built the way water eventually breaks through anything. Owen Garrett, surgical resident, 31 years old. The kind of laugh that started small and quiet and then couldn't help itself, grew and took over his whole face, and usually infected everyone within range. He'd been killed in a robbery at a convenience store 11 blocks from their apartment. Wrong place, wrong time. The calculus that reduces a person's entire existence to those 4 words. She had been with him. There, present. She'd seen it happen, and she'd pressed her hands against the wound, and she'd said his name, and done everything she knew how to do, and none of it had been sufficient. Owen died on a tile floor beside a humming refrigerator display case with a half-eaten granola bar in his jacket pocket because they'd run out of the good kind at home, and he'd offered to pick some up. She left medical school 8 weeks after the funeral, not only from grief, from the specific, clarifying revelation that years of studying how the human body worked had not made her meaningfully more able to save the person who mattered most to her. The knowledge was supposed to be armor. She had believed it was armor, and it wasn't, and she couldn't walk back into a lecture hall and pretend otherwise. She became a nurse because she couldn't stop entirely. Because stopping entirely felt like letting Owen win in reverse, letting his death claim the rest of her life along with his own, so she kept going. Smaller. Quieter Bay 4 at 2 a.m. with her hands doing the work they knew how to do. Her eyes closed somewhere in the middle of that thought. The last thing she was aware of was the money on the table. Still there. Still real. The knock came at 9:47 a.m. She knew before she was fully awake that it wasn't someone she'd invited. It had the kind of authority built into it that doesn't need volume. Not loud, just deliberate. The knock of someone who is completely certain they'll be heard. She went to the door without unlocking it. Who is it? Mr. Voss sent me. Male voice. Deep. Unhurried in a professional way. He requires your assistance, Voss. So now she had a name. I don't know anyone named Mr. Voss. You treated him last night. The wound on his left side, she pressed her forehead against the door, closed her eyes briefly. Just go back to bed. Just pretend the knock didn't happen. Just tell him to go to a hospital if he's having complications. He's sent a car. I don't get into cars with people I don't know. A pause. Longer than the last. She heard the sound of a phone call being made. Brief, muffled, indistinct. Then something slid under her door. A phone. Slim. Matte black. No visible branding because it didn't need any. She stared at it for a moment. Don't pick it up. Absolutely do not pick it. She picked it up. Held it to her ear. Ms. Vane. His voice. Low. Controlled as it had been the night before. But she could hear something underneath the control now that hadn't been audible in Bay 4. Something that was being compressed. Managed. I find myself requiring your services again. You need a hospital, Mr. Voss. We've established that's not a viable option. Then you need a different. The wound is infected. I need IV antibiotics and new sutures, possibly. A measured breath. I trust your hands. You don't know my hands. I watched them for 40 minutes last night. I know them better than you believe. She moved away from the door. To the window. Both SUVs still present on the street below. A third had joined them at some point during the night. 3. There are 3 now. This is the part where a sensible person calls the police. I could lose my nursing license. No one will know. I'll know, yes. A shift in his tone. Fractional but real. That's precisely why I'm asking you, instead of someone else. She hated that. She hated it completely, and specifically because it was aimed at the exact architecture of who she actually was. The part that couldn't accept the idea of someone needing medical care and not receiving it. Even when the someone in question was, whatever he was, how bad is the infection? My men are concerned about it. Men who wore dark suits and sunglasses in a hospital at 2 a.m. did not concern easily. She understood that. She looked at the money on the coffee table, at the 3 vehicles on the street, at the phone in her hand. Don't do this. This is the moment in every story where the person who does this regrets it enormously. I need supplies, she said. IV antibiotics, clean materials, suture kit, already assembled and waiting. You'll have me back before midnight. My word, she almost said she had no framework for evaluating what his word was worth. She stopped herself. Because she was going to say yes. She'd already made the decision somewhere in the conversation without fully noticing. The rest of this was just the interval between knowing and admitting. 15 minutes, she said. I need to get ready. The line went dead. She stood holding the phone. You absolute idiot, she told herself, with something that was almost affection for her own terrible judgment. Then she went to find clean clothes. The man in the hallway didn't speak during the 4 flights down. She didn't push for conversation. She was using the time to gather information. His height, 6'2" or close to it. His build. The suit was doing real work, but the work was real. The earpiece in his left ear. The way his right hand stayed relaxed at his side, in the practiced way of someone trained to reach it quickly when needed. Professional. The body language of competence applied to neutralization. She was deciding how frightened to be. The car outside was black. Of course, the rear door opened before she reached it. She stopped. "I'd like to know where we're going," the man beside her. "That's not something I can share. Then I'll go back inside and you can tell Mr. Voss I need to know where I'm going before I get into cars with strangers." A pause. A look exchanged with the driver. Then, "Westchester. Approximately 40 minutes. That's what I can give you." She got in, the door closed, and before she'd finished buckling, someone leaned in from the other side and placed a blindfold over her eyes. She grabbed for it immediately. A firm hand caught her wrists. Not rough, not violent, just final. The grip of someone who has already decided how this goes. "Security protocol, Ms. Vane. Mr. Voss's residence location is not disclosed. This wasn't discussed. It's not negotiable." She sat back, hands in her lap, the blindfold cutting out everything. Count turns. Count time. Mark when the road surface changes. You are a trained medical professional who has handled 3 years of overnight ER shifts. You are not helpless. You are paying attention. You're going to be fine. Left, then right. A long straight stretch. Highway on ramp. She felt the acceleration, the shift in road sound from city surface to asphalt. Then 40 minutes of her own breathing, and whatever her mind chose to do with the darkness. Then deceleration. A long, gentle curve. Gravel beneath the tires. The particular crunch that means a private drive. Maintained. Car stopped. Blindfold came off. She blinked. Twilight. The sky had gone deep blue-gray in the west. Pine trees, old growth, nothing planted for visual effect. Trees that had been there for decades and been in front of her. The house. It didn't announce itself. That was the first thing she registered. No gates with initials worked into ironwork. No columns designed to communicate wealth before you'd even parked. Just mass. Glass. Lines so clean they looked like the architect had been allergic to ornament. The kind of building that comes from actual conviction about what architecture is for, rather than from money looking for ways to spend itself. A circular drive. A fountain at the center. Water catching the last light. It was the most beautiful structure she'd ever stood in front of. She decided not to say that out loud. Men moved along the property perimeter, pairs, earpieces. Some with holsters visible. The ones without holsters visible weren't unarmed. She understood that quickly. Up stone steps. Wide front door, inside soaring ceilings. Art on the walls she recognized in pieces. A Rothko in the main hallway, unmistakable. Something that might have been a Hopper original, except that seemed impossibles. Except she was becoming less certain about what was impossible here. Floors that shifted from polished concrete to reclaimed dark wood. At a transition so deliberately placed. It had to have been designed by someone who thought carefully about transitions. Up a curved staircase. Down a corridor. Through a door into a room larger than her apartment. Adrian Voss was in the bed. He looked considerably worse than he had 8 hours ago. Skin ashen under the olive undertone. Hair damp with perspiration. Torso bare, her bandage visible on his left side, and even from across the room she could see the problem. Yellow-gray bleeding through the white of the dressing. An older man stood at the bedside. 60s. Silver at the temples. The posture of someone who had been carrying weight for so long it had become structural. Not a burden anymore, just the shape of him. He looked at her when she entered the way. You look at something you're not yet sure is a solution. 2 more suited men against the far wall. Adrian's eyes found her. Not the doorway, not the room. Her, directly, with the same quality of attention he'd had in Bay 4, like he'd been waiting for specifically her to come through the door. Not medical assistants in general, but her in particular. "Leave us," he said. The older man frowned. Spoke in something that sounded like check, sharp vowels, urgency compressed behind control. Adrian answered in the same language. 3 words. The older man's jaw tightened. He looked at Nora once more, assessing, Not unfriendly, not quite either, then walked out. The suited men followed. The heavy door closed behind them. She was alone with him again. She crossed to the bed, set her bag down. You should be in a hospital. Good morning. It's almost 7 p.m. Good evening, then. She pulled on her gloves. The infection is visible through the dressing. That's not a good sign at 20 hours post-suture. I may have overextended myself. Meaning what? Meaning there was a situation requiring my direct involvement. She stopped pulling on the gloves. Looked at him. You exerted yourself. Within 12 hours of a deep knife wound. With fresh sutures, it was necessary. People say that before sepsis sets in, and after they stop saying much of anything, it landed. She saw the infinitesimal shift in his expression, the smallest acknowledgement that she'd said something he hadn't dismissed. Tell me what we're dealing with, he said. She finished, with the gloves. I was going to, regardless. What they were dealing with was bad. She removed the dressing in layers, working from the edges first, peeling back where dried discharge had bonded the gauze to his skin. What she found underneath made her draw a controlled breath through her nose. The trained response of someone who has learned not to let alarm register visibly at bedsides. The tissue around the suture line was an angry red-purple at the center, radiating outward. The kind of warmth that radiates visibly. The incision itself was weeping, not clear serous fluid, but the thicker, discolored discharge that meant bacteria had established and was operating. She pressed 2 fingers gently alongside the wound. He flinched. First visible pain response she'd seen from him. Small, a jaw tightening, a fractional change in his breathing. But real and involuntary, 2 of the sutures need to come out. The tissue around them is compromised. She was already reaching for the removal kit. I'm going to debride the infected area. It will hurt more than the original suturing. Noted. The anesthetic is not optional this time. A pause. Different from the pause the night before. Then use it. She looked up. He was watching her. Still that quality of total attention, unblinking, sustained past the point where most people look away. You're scared, she said. It came out before she'd decided to say it. She would have walked it back, except she'd learned that walking things back usually makes them worse. He didn't answer immediately of what, specifically. He said finally, the infection. Another pause. My men are concerned, which means it's serious, which means I've made a miscalculation. You don't like being wrong, I don't like being vulnerable. The distinction was immediate. Those are different things. She drew the anesthetic. When did you last eat? This morning? Drink, coffee, water. He thought about it. Genuinely thought about it, which was itself information yesterday. Possibly. She looked at the supply kit his men had assembled on the dresser. Thorough. Impressively thorough. Hospital-grade IV materials. Multiple antibiotic options covering different bacteria classes. A portable pulse oximeter. Someone on his staff had real medical knowledge, or had received very precise instructions from someone who did. Fluid line first. You're dehydrated. She swabbed the inside of his arm. Combined with the infection, you're approaching septic shock territory. You've mentioned sepsis. I'll keep mentioning it until the risk passes. She slid the catheter needle in on the first attempt. Good vein, clean return. Taped it efficiently. Hold still. She hung the saline bag from the bedside lamp. The improvisation of someone who has worked in under-resourced environments long enough to stop seeing the gap between what should be there and what is. The older man came back an hour later. Adrian was half sleeping, the fever and the sedative component of the antibiotic drip doing their slow work, when the door opened quietly. The man crossed to the far side of the room, away from the bed, tilted his head toward Nora. She followed him to the window. How bad? He said. Serious. The antibiotics should begin working within 6 hours, if the bacteria is sensitive to what I'm using. If his fever doesn't break by morning, we need a different protocol. He nodded, looked at the sleeping figure on the bed. Something in his face that was professional concern and something else underneath it. Older, less manageable. You're Gregor, she said. He looked at her. He mentioned me. Your name. The context I worked out. A pause. I've known him since he was 17. He caught himself. Adjusted. Since he was very young. I've watched him build everything you see here. I've been present in situations where I was not confident he'd come through. A considered pause. I have not seen him allow a stranger this close in 10 years. I'm his nurse. You're considerably more than that to him already. Whether either of you has put a name to it yet, she looked at the bed, at Adrian's profile in the lamplight. The strong line of his jaw, slack now in something approaching genuine rest. The fine crease at the corner of his eye. The man beneath the architecture of control. He doesn't know me, she said. He knows your grandmother's name. He knows what's in your checking account. He knows about the man you lost. Gregor's voice was neutral. Not unkind, just factual. For Salvador. That is knowing someone. He doesn't investigate people he doesn't care about. Nora said nothing. Gregor moved toward the door, stopped at the frame. Whatever this is, be careful. I'm not threatening you. I'm telling you the water is deep, and he hasn't let himself need anyone since. He stopped. Chose not to finish. Just be careful with him. The door closed. She stood at the window for a moment, then went back to the chair beside the bed, sat down, told herself she was monitoring vitals, watching for adverse reactions to the medication. Doing what any good nurse would do for a patient in this condition. She told herself that she sat. The lamp made a warm circle that encompassed the chair and the edge of the bed, and approximately nothing else. Outside the windows, men moved in the dark in their careful pairs, keeping the rest of the world at a particular distance. He woke at 3 a.m. She knew before he moved. Some shift in the room's quality, the way air changes when someone moves from unconscious to present. She looked up from her notebook. He was watching her. You're still here, he said, his voice rough from sleep and fever, lower than his public register. Less managed. Your fever is at 101. I'm monitoring. You've been in that chair for 6 hours. Occupational hazard. A quiet moment. Then, why didn't you leave, I told you. You're Nora, her name. Said the way he'd said it in Bay 4, not read from a badge known already. Why didn't you leave? She looked at him. At the pale eyes reduced to something more human in the low light. At the face of someone who was, underneath all of it, simply asking. I don't know, she said. And it was the most honest answer she'd given anyone in months. He held it for a moment, then, quietly, in a register she hadn't heard from him before. I'm glad you didn't. She looked away first, reached for the blood pressure cuff on the nightstand. I need your arm. He offered it without comment. The numbers were better. Not good yet, but better. She wrote them down and told herself she was doing what any nurse would do. The sky outside the windows was beginning to change. Still dark. But the particular dark that means dark is running out. She poured out the cold coffee and stayed in the chair. She woke at 7:14 a.m. with a crick in her neck and the immediate awareness that she had made several decisions in the last 18 hours that her previous self would have recognized. The bed was empty. Sheets pushed back. IV line disconnected at the catheter. Cleanly, which meant either medical knowledge on his part or someone had done it for him while she was asleep. Neither option was fully reassuring. Mr. Voss. Nothing bathroom. Empty. The rest of the room. Just a room. She stood there in yesterday's clothes, with a needle mark on the inside of her own elbow, from testing the IV line placement, and a notebook full of vitals that had no patient attached to them. Right, she thought. So you spent the night in the home of a man whose last name you learned less than 24 hours ago, and he's just gone. This is a completely normal situation. It was Saturday. She'd briefly lost track of what day it was, which was not entirely surprising given the circumstances. A knock. Soft. Deliberate. Come in. The woman who entered was young. Mid-20s. Dark hair pulled back in a way that was functional rather than styled. Eyes that assessed Nora in a single efficient pass. She carried a tray. Coffee. Fruit. Something that smelled like eggs and real butter and herbs. Good morning, Ms. Vane, accent lighter than Adrian's but the same geography. I'm Petra. Mr. Voss asked me to bring you breakfast. Where is Mr. Voss? He had matters to attend to. He has a fever of 101 and an infected wound. He should be. Dr. Vega arrived at 6 this morning. Petra set the tray down with the ease of someone doing something she's done many times. He examined Mr. Voss. Administered supplemental antibiotics. Cleared him for limited activity. Nora stared at her. There's a physician on call. Yes. And he brought me here when he had a physician he could have called. Petra poured coffee into a cup that cost more than Nora's rent. Mr. Voss makes his own choices about who he trusts. A pause. Neutral. He trusts you. He doesn't know me. Petra straightened. Met Nora's eyes for the first time directly. He knows your grandmother's name. A beat. In his experience, that's more than most people offer. She left before Nora could find the right response to that. After breakfast, Nora explored. Because sitting in a beautiful room waiting for information that wasn't coming felt worse than moving, and because she was someone who needed to understand the spaces she occupied. Always had been. Owen had teased her about it. The way she cataloged every new environment, found the exits, noted the details. He'd called it her emergency brain. Said it never fully powered down. He wasn't wrong. The house opened room by room. A 2-story library with a rolling ladder, organized by someone who actually read rather than displayed. History, economics, military theory, multiple languages. And in one corner, almost hidden behind a section on Eastern European political history, a shelf of worn paperback thrillers. Creased spines. Pages turned many times. She pulled one out. Early 90s. Inside the front cover, in pencil, neat, angular handwriting. AV. 2003. She put it back carefully. Petra appeared at the far end of the corridor as she emerged from the conservatory. Deliberate timing. Would you like to see the grounds? Is that an offer or a protocol? Something shifted at the corner of Petra's mouth. An offer. Gregor will come with you. Gregor was waiting by a side entrance. He'd changed from last night's suit into something slightly less formal. Still dark, still pressed, but without the jacket. He looked older in daylight, not diminished by it. Just more years visible. The way years become visible on people who've been carrying things for a long time. They walked without talking initially. The garden to the east was Japanese in influence. A narrow stream crossed by a small arched bridge, either old or made to appear so, and she couldn't quite tell which. Maples heading toward autumn color, not there yet but headed. Stones placed with the kind of intention that makes placement look like the only possible choice. He designed this himself, Gregor said, noting rather than announcing. 10 years ago. Spent 3 months studying before he touched anything. Landscape design. He wanted to understand it before attempting it. A pause. That's how he approaches most things. Nora watched the water move over the stones. How long have you worked for him? Since he was 17. No hesitation. The answer too fast to be anything but true. His father and I were in business together for 11 years. When Antonio died, a breath. Old grief carried long enough to become familiar. I made a choice. To stay. He was a boy. He was 17 and he'd already killed 3 men and had no one left. Gregor's voice didn't change in pitch, but she felt the weight that was underneath it. Someone needed to stay. They reached a bench overlooking the lake. Sat. The water was very still this morning. The kind of still that mirrors the sky so accurately the horizon disappears. He had me investigated, Nora said. Before Bay 4. Before any of this, yes, so he already knew about Owen. Gregor was quiet for a moment. He knew about the shooting, about what happened to you afterward, about leaving medical school. Yes. She looked at the lake. He walked into that ER knowing he was going to choose me specifically. He was carried, a dry note, the first she'd heard from him. But yes. He had options, vetted contacts, other resources available. He chose St. Cross. A pause. He chose Bay 4. Something moved in her chest. Something she wasn't quite ready to examine. Why? She said. Gregor considered this longer than she expected, because you'd seen the worst thing that can happen to a person and you kept going. He looked at the water. In his experience, that's uncommon. She was back inside at 11 when Gregor's phone buzzed 3 times in quick succession. He glanced at it, his expression held. But something in his posture recalibrated, a subtle increase in a quality of readiness that had been present all along, but was now more visible. We should go in, he said. Not quickly. The way you say things when you don't want to communicate urgency but you are, in fact, urgent. Inside, the house had changed. Not visibly, not dramatically. The way weather changes before a storm. A shift in pressure, in how people move through space, in where their attention is directed. Staff that had been present were absent. The suited men who'd maintained positions at the edges of rooms were now centralized and in motion. Speaking in short, rapid exchanges she couldn't follow. Gregor steered her toward a sitting room. Wait here. What's happening? Nothing that requires your attention. You're not good at reassurance. I'm not attempting reassurance. I'm attempting to keep you in one room. He left. The door didn't lock. She noted that specifically. She waited 6 minutes, then opened the door. The sound came from the study across the hall. A screen, large, mounted opposite the desk. And on the screen a man she'd never seen, 45, approximately. Silver running through dark hair that was thick and deliberate. A face that had spent decades arranging itself into an expression of reasonable calm that had no particular relationship to what was actually happening behind it. An expensive suit worn without ostentation. A glass of water on the surface in front of him. He was looking at the screen. But the feed was two-way, which meant he was looking into the room, which meant he was, right now, looking at her. She'd stepped into the doorway without planning to. Now she was in his sightline, and he'd found her immediately, the way certain kinds of attention always find motion. And he was watching her with the interest of someone who has just located something they expected to find. Gregor stood at the desk. 2 other men flanked him. Then Adrian walked in from the left side of the room, same controlled economy she'd watched in Bay 4. Every movement deliberate, nothing wasted. Dressed, jacket on, hair back. Every visible surface presenting the version of himself that operated in the world. Only she knew about the fever underneath all of it. He saw her in the doorway. His eyes moved to hers for exactly 1 second. A communication she couldn't fully decode, but that registered as important. Then he stepped into the screen's frame. The man on the other end spoke first. Ms. Vane, his accent was heavier than Adrian's. The vowels had a different architecture. "I've been curious about you," she said nothing. "You don't need to be frightened. This is simply a conversation, an expansive gesture, almost warm. You're free to leave at any moment. I could send a car for you right now. My people are very capable, Adrian. She's here because she chose to be, is that so?" The man on the screen, Roman Karev. She'd learn his name later from Gregor. In a different room, looked at her with the focused interest of someone used to reading people quickly and accurately. "Is that true, Ms. Vane?" The room was very quiet. She was aware of everything in it simultaneously. Gregor to her left, Adrian in front of the screen, the 2 suited men, the camera sending her image to wherever Roman Karev was sitting with his glass of water and his reasonable expression. She could step back, out of frame, out of the question. It was available to her. She didn't. "I'm in the middle of treating a patient," she said. "I'd like to get back to it." Something moved across Karev's face. Quick. Gone before she could name it, Adrian turned slightly toward her. Just his head, just enough. Something in his expression she couldn't read from this angle, but registered as significant. Then Gregor was beside her, gentle, firm hand at her elbow, steering her backward. Out of the doorway, into the hall. The study door closed. She stood in the corridor. "You just spoke to whoever that was without knowing who that was. You talked back to him, in front of his camera, in front of everyone. You did that and you didn't step out of frame first. Why didn't you step out of frame?" She didn't have the answer yet, but she noticed she wasn't sorry she'd stayed. Gregor found her in the library 20 minutes later. "Roman Karev," he said, without preamble. "He leads an organization that has been competing with us for territory in the Northeast for 14 months. Competing meaning exactly what you think it means." She processed this. "And he called here because someone told him Adrian was injured, and someone told him about you." Gregor sat in the leather chair across from her, tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. A security guard at St. Cross, placed there 8 weeks ago. Waiting for exactly this kind of opportunity, she went very still. He was in the hospital for 2 months, waiting for a sign of real vulnerability. When Adrian needs actual medical care, not operational injury, but the kind where he requires genuine assistance, that's significant intelligence. Gregor's voice was precise. "You were how they found us." She sat with this. You were a thread they pulled. You're not anymore." He looked at her directly. "But they know you exist. They know where you live. They know what you." He stopped. She looked up. He held her gaze for a moment. Then, "You're not safe going back to your apartment right now." She heard the door behind her. She knew without turning. Adrian came in, moved to the desk, looked at what Gregor placed on its surface. A device the size of a fingernail, matte black, dug from the lining of her medical bag. "My bag," she said, in her pocket. Left side lining. Gregor's voice was flat. "Active from the moment you arrived." She sat down without deciding to. The security guard, the one who'd asked to check her bag when she'd arrived for her shift 8 days ago, said something about a new protocol she'd been running late and hadn't verified. "I didn't know," she said. We know. That's not in question. Adrian's expression was controlled, but she'd spent enough hours watching his face that she could see what the control was containing. Not anger. Something colder than anger. More directed. I'm sorry, he said. She hadn't expected that. The directness of it. You didn't put it there, she said. No. But I brought you into circumstances where someone could. He looked at the device. I underestimated Karev's response speed. I should not have. Does this mean I can't go home? Not today. Possibly not tomorrow. She looked at the ceiling. Then back at him. I need to call the hospital. Handled. Your supervisor believes you have influenza. 3 days excused. She opened her mouth. It was necessary, he said. Before she could say it, you had no, I know that, still controlled. But something not calm underneath. I know I had no right. I acted to protect you. Both things can be simultaneously true. The room was quiet, my rent, she said, because she was exhausted and the device on the desk was making the floor feel tilted. It's due. 6 months. Handled. I didn't. Your grandmother's facility. 12 months. She stood up. Stop. He stopped. Stop making decisions about my life without asking me, steadier than she felt. I understand you think you're solving problems. I understand that in your world this is how things get handled. But I'm not a situation to be managed. Gregor had gone completely still in the corner. Adrian looked at her for a long moment. You're right, he said, just that. No pivot. No qualification. She hadn't expected it. Don't reverse it just because I pushed back. My grandmother's care doesn't deserve to be caught in a point I'm making. She sat back down. Just ask. Next time. Ask first. Next time, he said, something about the way he said it. Like the phrase itself was being filed somewhere. He was better by that afternoon. Fever at 100.1 when she checked at 2 p.m. The IV antibiotics working. Slowly, but working. The wound edges still inflamed, but the progression had stopped. She changed the dressing and wrote the improvement in her notebook, and told him so. He received medical information the way he received information within processing it without displaying what he was doing with it. He was working from the bed. Documents. Laptop. Phone calls in 3 different languages, sometimes mid-sentence without signaling the switch. She found this genuinely impressive and also mildly alarming, and said neither thing aloud. You speak Czech, she said, while writing in her notebook. Not quite a question, and 4 others, 4 German, Russian, French, passable Arabic. He glanced up. You're writing that down. I'm writing down your blood pressure. You were writing down languages. She turned the notebook toward him briefly. Blood pressure numbers. Legible. He returned to his documents without further comment, but the corner of his mouth had moved. Petra brought lunch, and lingered after. Not intrusively, just present. Like she was deciding whether to say something. When Adrian stepped into the adjoining room for a call, Petra said, How long were you in medical school? Nora looked up. 3 years. You would have been a doctor, I would have. Petra was quiet. Looking at the door Adrian had gone through. He found me in a shelter in Bridgeport. I was 16. My stepfather. Reorganized. The details don't matter. He found me. He gave me work and safety and education. She looked at Nora. I'm not telling you he's a good man. I'm telling you he's a complicated one, who has never once used his power against someone weaker than him for any reason other than their benefit. He's used plenty of people, equals, competitors, people who made the same choices he made, a beat. Not me, not the people who work in this house. Not, she glanced at the door again. He has never confused those 2 categories. Nora thought about the money in her scrubs pocket the first night. About the device the size of a fingernail. About a man who'd spent 3 months learning landscape design before touching a single stone. About a shelf of battered paperback thrillers in a corner of a library where nobody was supposed to look. Thank you, she said to Petra. Petra collected the tray and left. It was 9 in the evening when Adrian led her to the other wing. The hallway narrowed. The flooring shifted to dark wood. The ceiling dropped by a foot. The air was different, older, like it had been inhabited in a way the newer rooms hadn't yet been. He stopped at a door, heavy wood, carved with a crest she'd noticed twice before, on a sealed envelope she'd received earlier that she still hadn't opened. He produced a key. Old. The kind with actual physical teeth. My father's study, he said. I haven't changed it. The doors swung open, velvet curtains. Dark bookshelves to the ceiling. An enormous desk in the center, and on the desk, Bare except for a letter opener, shaped like a dagger, and a single framed photograph. He picked up the photograph, held it without looking at her, then handed it over. A younger version of him, 16, maybe 17, the same jaw, the same quality of the eyes, observant, measuring, standing beside a man with the same coloring, the same bone structure, his father. And between them a woman with dark hair, and one hand resting on the Malvoy's shoulder, and a smile that belonged to someone who had no idea what was coming. 3 months before they were killed, he said. He'd moved to the window, back to her. The lake beyond the glass was black at this hour, visible only where security lights caught the surface. My father built everything from nothing. He was careful, intelligent. He made the error of becoming too successful in the wrong geography. A pause not for effect but for precision. His competitors decided to solve the problem by eliminating him. She looked at the woman's hand on the boy's shoulder. They came at 2 in the morning. Shot my father in this room. He didn't turn around. My mother heard it from upstairs. She ran toward the sound. They shot her on the staircase, the letter opener, the dagger shape of it, the key he still carried. The room unchanged, and you, she said. I was in my room. Heard the first shot. My father kept a gun in his nightstand. I took it. Finally he turned, his expression composed with effort. I killed 3 of them before they controlled me. I was 17, God. Gregor arrived with our people before they could do more than that. He came away from the window, sat in the desk, chair's father's chair. She understood that he would sit in here but nowhere else. I spent 3 years understanding exactly what had happened. Then 3 more years, ensuring it couldn't happen again. She sat down on the edge of the chair across from him, still holding the photograph. Did it help? When you'd finished. The revenge. He looked at her. Did it fix anything, she said. A long pause. No, he said. It didn't return them. He looked at his hands on the desk, but it established something. A truth about the cost of moving against me, which has protected everyone associated with me since. She set the photograph carefully on the desk. He looked at it for a moment. Why are you telling me this? She said quietly. Because I want you to understand what I am. He met her eyes. Not the part that sat in Bay 4 and let you put 17 sutures in my side. The whole of it, the history. So I'll accept it, so you'll see it, and make an informed decision about whether you want to be here. A pause. I'm not. He stopped, which was unusual. She'd noticed he stopped mid-sentence very rarely. I'm not good at this, whatever this is. I've operated for 17 years in a world where everything can be reduced to calculation. And you, he stopped again. I am what? She said. The only thing in 17 years I haven't been able to reduce to one. The room was quiet. The dagger, letter opener, the photograph. The velvet curtains holding out the dark. Tell me about the shooting, she said. She watched his eyes. Owen, you found the file. How long have you known since I had you investigated? Before the ER, you had the file before we met. Yes, and you know who. I know where the shooter is now. Yes, 3 years. She'd carried that question for 3 years. Who? Where? The police had closed the case as unsolvable, and she'd learned to live inside that closing. And now the man sitting across from her, in his dead father's chair, in the preserved room with the dagger on the desk, he'd had the answer for 6 weeks. You could have led with that, she said carefully. I could have. I didn't, because I didn't want it to be the reason you stayed. She stood, turned away from him, toward the curtains and the lake she couldn't see. Who was he? A man named Decker. Raymond Decker. Operative. Owen was collateral. He saw something during a handoff that went wrong, saw Decker's face, and Decker saw him see it. A pause. She heard something in his voice that wasn't quite apology, but shared its area code. The decision took approximately 4 seconds. 4 seconds. Owen's entire existence measured against a contract operative's risk assessment and coming out to 4 seconds on the other side. Collateral, she said, the words sitting in her mouth like something wrong. 3 years of my life. My career. Everything that came after. Collateral, I'm sorry. She turned back. He was looking at her directly. Not away. Not at the desk or the photograph or any of the other objects in the room that might make looking at her easier. The words aren't adequate, he said. She stood there for a moment. Then she sat back down, because she needed to be sitting, and because there was something in this room, in the preserved space with the dagger and the photograph, and the man who'd been 17 and alone and had been keeping the key for 17 years. That made leaving feel like a kind of abandonment she wasn't capable of. Owen hadn't known that about her. He'd called it her best quality, and her worst in the same breath, sometimes in the same sentence. She picked up the photograph again, looked at the woman's hand on the boy's shoulder. She knew how to sew. Not quite at random. Adrian looked at her, then at the photograph. Something shifted in his face. My mother? No, genuinely confused. Why? Never mind. She shook her head, and the confusion became something else. He looked at her the way you look at something you can't immediately classify. Then very quietly, like accessing a door that had been sealed for a long time, she sang. She was extraordinary at it. She sang in this house constantly. He stopped. I haven't thought about that in a long time. They sat in the preserved room, with the memory of his mother's singing between them. The sutures were holding. The fever was going down. Something else was beginning. She found the envelope at 11:30 p.m., back in the guest room. It had appeared on the dresser while she'd been in the other wing, placed with deliberate precision, her name on the front, in handwriting she recognized as his. She didn't open it immediately. She changed into the clothes Petra had left, sat on the edge of the bed, looked at the envelope, then went to the window instead, the grounds below, the security lights, the pairs of men walking their circuits, and more than before. Significantly more. She counted 14 visible on the east side alone. Where there had been 8 in the morning, there were now at minimum double. Something was building. She could feel it the way you feel weather shift, not the specific information, just the atmospheric pressure of it. She went to find Gregor. He was in the main study, on the phone. He held up one hand, wait, and ended the call in 30 seconds. The men outside, she said, precaution. Precaution in response to what? He looked at her, making a decision. Roman Karev has proposed a direct meeting, tonight, to negotiate. He paused on the word. Terms meaning resolution of ongoing disputes, territory, business, compensation for various incidents. A careful pause. In our world, the size of what you bring to a conversation is part of the conversation. She looked at the window. At the darkness beyond it, is Adrian safe? Gregor was quiet for a moment too long. Gregor, he's experienced. This isn't his first negotiation with Karev. A pause. But he's not at full strength. And Karev knows it. So the answer is no. The answer is, he'll be as safe as he can make himself. She went back to the guest room, sat on the bed, picked up the envelope, put it back down, lay back and looked at the ceiling of a room she hadn't chosen to be in, and thought about the 17-year-old boy who'd learned what the world actually was in a single night in a study down the hall, and had never had anyone ask him afterward if he was all right. She thought about Owen, about the word collateral, about 3 years of grief that had condensed over time into the specific shape of an unanswerable question. And now there was an answer, and the answer was small and senseless in the way all the worst things are, not because they're complicated, but because they're not. Because a person's whole life can end, because someone was somewhere they happened to be at a time. Someone else happened to be there with a decision to make. She lay in the dark, not sleeping, very much not sleeping. At 1 a.m. she heard footsteps in the hallway, stopping at her door. Then continuing past, she didn't call out. But she was aware of not calling out, aware of it as a choice communicated through its absence. The footsteps moved on. She lay there for another hour, somewhere in the second hour, in the specific quiet of a house that contained too many armed men and one woman who had no logical reason to still be in it and couldn't make herself leave. Nora Vane made a decision. Not the final one, not yet, but the smaller one underneath it. The one that always comes first, the one that says, whatever this is, I am not going to look away from it. She reached for the envelope, and put it back. Not yet. She would know when Adrian found her in the library at 11 p.m., before the preparations reached their peak. She'd been there for 2 hours with a history of post-war Eastern Europe she'd pulled from the shelf. Not because she'd planned to read it, but because her hands needed something to do, and the book was there. He sat across from her, still dressed, still controlled, still running a low-grade fever she could see in the color at his cheekbones. You should be resting, she said. I know. Your wound is still. I know. He looked at her. I wanted to tell you myself before you heard it from Gregor. The meeting tonight. You're going. I have to. She closed the book, set it down. Adrian. He looked at her. Come back with the same number of holes you currently have. Something moved through his face, unmanaged, uncontrolled, the thing underneath 17 years of architecture. Brief. Like a light going on in a window you didn't know was inhabited. I intend to, he said. That's not a guarantee. No, he stood. Straightened jacket with care. It's what I have. She watched him walk to the door. Adrian, he stopped. She had many things she could have said. She said, none of them. Because none of them were right yet. Because she was still inside the small decision, not the large one, and couldn't speak honestly from a place she hadn't fully arrived at. Come back, she said. He looked at her for one moment. Yes, and he was gone. The convoy left at 11:47 p.m. She stood at the window and watched. The lake caught the headlights briefly as the lead vehicle curved toward the gate, then gone. The taillights faded. The dark came back. She stayed at the window for a long time. In her chest, something she recognized from a different night 3 years ago. Not the same thing. Nothing would be the same thing. But adjacent, the particular quality of caring about an outcome you have no power to affect. She pressed her hand to the cold glass, stayed there, waited. He came back at 4:17 a.m. She knew the exact time, because she'd been watching the nightstand clock with the kind of focused attention you apply when everything else is certain to look at directly. The numbers had moved with agonizing slowness. 1:47, 2:30, 3:08, and she'd told herself at each one that she was simply awake, simply monitoring, simply a nurse in a complicated situation, handling it with professional detachment, which was almost entirely untrue. 4:17. Vehicles on the private drive, more than one. Gravel, doors, voices, low controlled, the cadence of men reporting in. She was at the window before she decided to be. 3 SUVs in the circular drive. Security closing around them the way water closes around something dropped into it. Immediate, total, automatic. The rear door of the center vehicle opened. Adrian stepped out, moving carefully, but upright, walking under his own direction. And she exhaled something she'd been holding for 4 hours without fully realizing she'd been holding it. Some long compressed breath that left her chest feeling hollow and strange and relieved all at once. He looked up at the window, her window specifically, like he'd known exactly where to look without having to find it. Their eyes met across the dark distance. 1 second, maybe 2. Then Gregor was beside him, talking, and he looked away, and the moment closed. She stepped back from the glass, sat on the edge of the bed, put her face in her hands. You are in very significant trouble, she told herself. You understand the depth of the trouble, correct? She did understand it. That was the problem. He came to find her 20 minutes later. She was still on the edge of the bed when the door opened. He paused at the threshold, not knocking, but pausing in a way that functioned as asking permission. She looked at him, jacket gone, shirt open at the collar. The look of a man who had spent 4 hours managing something exhausting and had arrived at the one room where he didn't have to manage anything. You're awake, he said. I'm observant. He came in, sat in the chair across from the bed, the same chairs where she'd occupied through 2 nights of vital sign checks. The meeting, she said, done, and, Karev accepted terms. She waited. He'll withdraw interest in you. In your involvement. In using you as, he paused on the word. Leverage, said with something underneath it. Not quite anger, the thing that lives on the other side of anger when it's been fully processed. In return, I've made certain concessions. How much? It doesn't matter. It matters to me. He held her gaze. A shipping route in the Northeast. Annual value of approximately $40 million. She absorbed this. You gave up $40 million a year. Yes, for my safety. Among other considerations. What other considerations? A pause. I'll tell you the rest in the morning. Tell me now. There's more you need to know. About Karev, about Owen. He stopped on the name, deliberate. But you haven't slept. And what I have to tell you deserves your actual attention. Not 4 a.m. after all of this. She thought about arguing. She was too tired to argue well. How's the wound, she said instead, sore. That's data, she stood. Sit on the bed. He started to say something. Sit on the bed, Adrian. He sat on the bed. She worked in the low light. Old dressing off, wound edges checked, new dressing applied with the same even pressure Margaret had taught her to use on fabric. He was watching her face again. Always her face. Stop that, she said. Stop what? Looking at me like that, like what? She met his eyes briefly. Like you're deciding something. I decided something in Bay 4. His voice quiet. Certain. 4 days ago, she looked back at the bandage. Smoothed the last edge. Sleep, she said. I'll check the wound in the morning. Will you still be here? She picked up the discarded materials. Didn't answer immediately. Yes, she said. Tonight I'll still be here. She went back to the chair. He lay back. Didn't close his eyes immediately. Watched the ceiling. Nora, thank you. She looked at him. His face in the low light stripped of everything it normally carried. Not the version that commanded and negotiated and calculated. Just the face of someone tired and in pain who had come home and found someone waiting. Don't thank me yet, she said. I still don't know the rest of what you're not telling me. The corner of his mouth moved. In the morning, he said. In the morning, she found him at the desk at 9:30 a.m., the secondary study, the functional one. Documents cleared to one side. He was sitting with his hands flat on the surface and a manila folder in front of him, closed, and he looked up when she came in with the quality of someone who has been waiting and is now ready. She sat across from him, coffee in hand, hair in a hastily constructed bun. She did not care, even slightly, about any of that. Tell me, she said. He opened the folder, photographs, documents, a surveillance log spanning 8 months, and on top, a face she'd never seen. A man in his 40s, unremarkable in appearance. The kind of face that's designed to disappear in crowds, which is itself a kind of design. Raymond Decker, Adrian said. Contract operative for 15 years. He looked at the photograph. 3 years ago, he was hired by an organization competing with Karev for distribution rights in Lower Manhattan. There was a handoff that went wrong on the street outside a convenience store on Amsterdam Avenue. She looked at the photograph. Owen was there, she said. He'd stopped to buy aspirin. He texted you he had a headache. A pause. I know because you mentioned it in your statement to the police afterward. He'd texted, I have a headache. Picking up aspirin on the way home. She'd read that text 1,000 times in the 3 months after. The specific terrible ordinariness of it. He saw the handoff, she said. He saw more than that. He saw Decker's face, and Decker saw him see it. Level voice. Factual. Stripped of editorializing. He was giving her the truth in its plainest form, and she understood that was its own category of respect. The decision took approximately 4 seconds. 4 seconds, Owen's entire existence, measured against a contract operative's professional risk calculation, had come out to 4 seconds on the other side. She sat with that for a moment, the coffee warm in her hands. Sun at the mid-morning angle through the window. Somewhere on the grounds, normal sounds. A vehicle, a door, someone's voice. Where is he now, she said. Chicago. Private security work for the past 18 months. Changed his name once. Changed his methods. A slight pause. But I'm thorough. I know you're thorough. Nora. She looked up. I've known where Decker is for 6 weeks. Since before Bay 4. Since before I chose St. Croix. A pause. I didn't use that information to bring you to me. I'm not telling you now to create a debt. I'm telling you now because, she said, because what happens next belongs to you. Not to me. She looked at the photograph. Raymond Decker. Average face. 4-second decision. 15 years of contract work and a new name in Chicago. What are my options? She said. The FBI. What I have here is sufficient to open a case. Possibly sufficient for an arrest. He looked at the folder. Or, he didn't finish. She looked at him. Say it. Or I handle it the way I handle things. His eyes on hers. Steady. I'm not recommending it. I'm being honest about what exists. She looked at the photograph for a long time. The room was very quiet. Close the folder, she said. He did. Give me the day. You can have as long as you need. I know. That's not what I said. Gregor drove her back at noon. No blindfold. She watched the entire route. Counted turns. Noted landmarks. Filed all of it in the part of her brain that her mother had called paranoid and Owen had called her emergency brain, and she called simply useful. 42 minutes. Westchester to Upper Manhattan. She could find her way back. She understood that he understood this. The absence of the blindfold was its own communication. Her apartment looked exactly as she'd left it, except for the locks. 2 new deadbolts keyed differently. A security panel beside the door, small, matte gray, 1 steady green indicator light. She stood in the middle of her studio. The $2,500 from the first night was still on the coffee table, untouched through all of it. The futon. The ceiling stain. Gerald on the nightstand with the repaired ear. Everything exactly where she'd left it. Same place, different person standing in it. She sat on the futon and did something she hadn't done in 3 years. She took out her phone and pulled up Owen's contact. Still there, still not deleted. One of the things she'd been too afraid or too stubborn or maybe just too human to let go, and looked at the last text he'd sent Headache, picking up aspirin on the way home. "Don't wait up," she'd replied. "I'm always up," and she'd meant it. And she'd been awake when it happened. And he'd stopped at a convenience store on Amsterdam Avenue, and Raymond Decker had looked at him for 4 seconds and made a decision. She put the phone down, looked at the ceiling. "What do you want?" she asked herself. Not what you should want. Not what's rational or professionally advisable. What do you actually want? She thought about the FBI option. The documentation, the case that would take years, the trial that might or might not happen. The conviction that statistics suggested was unlikely. She thought about the other option. The one Adrian hadn't named. The way it would be done and finished, and she would know it was done. And she would carry the knowledge of it. She knew what Owen would say. She knew exactly what Owen would say because she'd known him for 4 years, and she knew what he believed about justice, and about the difference between justice and vengeance, and about which of the two you could live inside of, without it living inside of you. Instead, he was wrong sometimes. He'd have been the first to say so. But not about this. She picked up her phone, called the hospital first. Harmon answered on the second ring. "Vane, how's the flu? Better?" "I'll be in tomorrow. Influenza usually takes." "I'll be in tomorrow, Dr. Harmon." A pause. "Okay. 7. She hung up. Then she called the number she'd memorized from the burner phone and saved in her own on the second night in the guest room, when she'd understood she was going to need it at some point. He picked up on the first ring. Nora, just her name. But in it, an exhale too small to be audible, unless you were specifically listening for it. Which she was. Which told her everything about how the past 12 hours had been for him. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Tell me, Decker?" She looked at Gerald on the nightstand. The stuffed rabbit with the repaired ear, Margaret's stitching still holding after 30 years. "I want you to give everything you have to the FBI. Full documentation. Anonymous submission. Everything. Silence. I know the probability," she said. "I know it might go nowhere. I know Decker might never face anything." She stopped, restarted. "But I know what Owen believed, and I know that making the other decision would do something to me that can't be undone. And I've already undone too many things." A longer silence. "Okay," Adrian said. "Just, okay. It's your choice. It belongs to you." A pause. "I'll have it submitted by end of day." She closed her eyes. Something released in her chest. The specific physical sensation of putting down something heavy enough that you'd stop noticing its weight. Not gone. She knew it wasn't gone. Knew Decker might walk. Knew the case might collapse. But out of her hands. Which was where it needed to be. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me for this. I should have given you this information earlier. Doing now what I should have done then isn't generosity." "No," she said. "It's honesty." Silence. "I have 3 things to say," she told him. "Let me say all 3 before you respond." "All right, first. I'm going back to St. Cross tomorrow. Every scheduled shift, no interference with my work. My nursing isn't decorative and it isn't a hobby. It's what I am, yes. Second, no decisions about my life without asking me first. Not rent, not the hospital, not security installations in my apartment, not what my supervisor thinks I'm dying of. Ask me. I'm an adult and I have not surrendered that just because I've..." She stopped. You've what?" he said. She was not finishing that sentence right now. "Just because I've been involved in this situation." A beat of silence that had a shape to it. "Understood," he said. Third, she sat up straighter. "Decker, you submit the tip, you give the FBI everything, and then you step back. Whatever happens, you let it happen." "You don't," she stopped. "You don't supplement the legal system with your own." The longest silence yet. 6 seconds. She counted. "That goes against everything I've done for 17 years. He said, "I know. Against my assessment of what produces reliable outcomes." "I know that too," she waited. "Adrian, yes. Is it something you can agree to?" 7 seconds. "Yes," he said. "For you, yes." She let out a breath. The refrigerator clicked. The compressor cycled. Someone on the street below was parallel parking very badly and being honked at for it. Normal. loud, ordinary. New York. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. Neither of them said anything for a moment after that, which was its own kind of conversation. She went to St. Cross the next morning, 7:02 a.m., the antiseptic smell, the old coffee, the specific quality of light in the waiting room at this hour, tired people in plastic chairs, the overnight staff handing off to the day shift, the steady accumulation of noise from machines and pages, and the ambient sound of a place that operates continuously. She stood in the entrance for a moment. 3 years she'd walked through this door. 3 years of this smell and this light and the weight of the badge on her lanyard. Today it felt different, not smaller or larger, just more present. Like she'd been looking at it through something, and someone had cleaned whatever that something was. She called her grandmother during the lunch break. Margaret picked up on the 5th ring. Her voice had the particular quality of mid-afternoon. Clearer than mornings, not yet the fog of evening, the window of lucidity that Nora had to time her calls around. Nora Bird, Margaret said. Hi, Grandma. You sound different. I'm at work. No. A pause. The rustle of Margaret shifting. You sound like yourself. You've been gone a while. Nora looked at the break room wall. I've been right here, she said. Margaret, unconvinced. Are you eating? I had very good eggs this week, as a matter of fact. Someone else made them? Yes. A longer pause. Then, someone important? She thought about Adrian in Bay 4, with blood on his white shirt and the quality of attention in those pale eyes. The preserved study with the dagger and the photograph. A fever breaking at 3 a.m. in a chair beside a bed that wasn't hers. The specific feeling of someone looking for your window when they get out of a car at 4:17 in the morning. I don't know yet, she said honestly. Well, Margaret's voice had the dry warmth of a woman who'd seen 83 years of people trying to figure out what they meant to each other. That's a more promising answer than the last one. She took a taxi after her shift, not home. Westchester, she'd thought about calling ahead. Had the phone in her hand twice, put it away both times, because some things have to be said in person. And some choices have to be arrived at under your own direction. Without anyone meeting you partway, the cab driver didn't ask about the address. New York. People went strange places for reasons that were their own. 42 minutes. She watched the route the entire way. Every turn exactly as she'd mapped it, the gate. She rolled down the window. Nora Vane, she said to the camera. He should be expecting me. Or he would be if I'd called. Which I didn't. 10 seconds. The gate opened. The drive curved through the trees. The fountain in the circular drive, still running. The house with its clean lines and its tended grounds. And the security personnel doing their measured circuits. The front door opened before she reached it. Gregor, he looked at her with that assessing expression she'd come to understand, was simply how he looked at everything. Not unfriendly, not hostile, just accurate. The working study or his father's, she said. A pause. The working one. She walked past him, through the main hall, past the Rothko, past the library, down the corridor to the smaller study. She knocked twice. He was at the desk, jacket off, sleeves rolled. The look of someone who'd been working for several hours and was surfacing from deep enough in it that surfacing required an actual process. He looked up, and the process stopped immediately. He stood. Not from protocol, not from training, because she'd walked into the room, and his body had apparently decided standing was the correct response before his mind had finished the question. They looked at each other. You didn't call, he said. No, I would have sent a car, I know. She looked at him. The fever color was gone from his cheeks. He looked like himself. Whatever that meant for a man she'd known for 4 days that felt considerably longer than that. I wanted to get here on my own. He understood what she meant. She could see that he understood it. The FBI tip, she said, submitted at 3 this afternoon. Full documentation. 8 months of surveillance. Decker's current location. Financial records. A pause. It's done, thank you. You said not to thank me for that. I changed my mind. She came further into the room. I'm allowed to do that. You can do whatever you want. He said it simply, like stating a fact. You always could. She stopped at the edge of the desk, looked at the documents he'd been working on. Numbers mostly. The operational language of things she didn't fully understand and wasn't sure she needed to. Not the specifics. Just the shape of it. I have conditions, she said. Something shifted in his expression. an alertness, not defensive. "Ready, tell me," he said. "I'm going back to St. Cross. Every shift. No interference, agreed. If there's ever a situation involving my safety, I find out before it's handled. Not after," a flicker, the thing that meant he was running against habit. "That's not always. I didn't say always. I said if it involves my safety." She held his gaze. "My safety is my information." A pause. "Agreed," and Decker. "Whatever the FBI does. Whatever the outcome is, even. Steady, you let it be." The longest pause. She waited. He was fighting something. She could see him fighting it. 17 years of a particular understanding of how justice worked and who administered it and what reliable outcomes required. She wasn't asking him to abandon all of it. She was asking him to relinquish one outcome. "For her," agreed, he said, just the one word. But she could see what it cost. And she understood that the cost was, in its way, the most significant thing anyone had offered her in 3 years. She looked at her hands on the edge of the desk. "I need you to understand something," she said. "Tell me, I'm not someone who can be managed, or protected from things I haven't consented to, or decided about without being consulted." She looked at him. "I've spent 3 years getting very small, very careful, because small felt safe after Owen. And maybe it was for a while. He was very still. But I don't want to be small anymore," she said. "And whatever this is, I need it to be between two people who are both actually present, not a person and a set of management decisions wearing a person's face." He came around the desk, not quickly, not dramatically, just crossed the distance until he was close enough that she could see the exact color of his eyes in the study light. The pale blue she'd first seen in Bay 4, above 17 sutures and a white shirt soaked through with blood. "I know how to command," he said. "How to strategize. How to anticipate and preempt and calculate odds most people can't hold simultaneously." He looked at her. "I don't know how to be what you're describing. I don't have a model for it, I know. I'll make mistakes, I know." "You're not frightened by that." "I'm frightened by all of it," she said. "I've been frightened since I pulled back that curtain, and you looked at me like you'd already been waiting." She held his gaze. "I'm just done letting frightened make my decisions." He raised one hand, slowly, the slowness of someone who has learned to move carefully around things they don't want to break. His hand came to rest against her jaw. Just that. His palm against her cheek. Warm. The same warmth she'd felt when she'd checked his temperature a dozen times. Except now it wasn't clinical. Now it was a man's hand and a woman's face and whatever was happening between them. "I don't know what I'm doing," he said quietly. "Join the club." She put her hand over his. Held it there. "We're both improvising." Something happened to his face then. Not the controlled version. Not the public architecture. The thing underneath. The thing she'd glimpsed in the father's study and in the 3 a.m. chairside conversation and when he'd come back at 4:17 and looked for her window before he'd done anything else. Relief. Enormous. The look of someone who has been holding something alone for a very long time and has just been told they don't have to anymore. He pressed his forehead to hers, not a kiss, just that, foreheads. His hand warm at her jaw, her hand over his, the sound of both of them breathing in the same room. "Stay," he said, not a strategy, not a calculation, not the voice that commanded 200 men and negotiated millions in territory concessions, just a man, just a word. Just the simple and enormous act of asking. She closed her eyes. "I'm staying," she said. She found Gregor in the kitchen an hour later. He was standing at the counter with tea, looking out at the grounds. He turned when she came in with the expression of someone who hadn't been entirely surprised to hear footsteps. She poured coffee. Sat at the table, he looked at her for a moment. "You came back on your own. Taxi, I know. I have the camera footage." A pause. "Old habits, he told me about his parents," she said. "In the study. I assumed he eventually would. Does he talk about them? With anyone?" Gregor looked at his tea, his father. "In operational terms. What Antonio built, what Adrian has continued building. Business history." He paused. "His mother. In 17 years I've heard him mention her twice." He looked at Nora. "He mentioned her to you, the singing. The detail Adrian had produced with the specific surprise of someone finding a door they'd assumed was sealed and discovering it still opened. She sang." Nora said. Gregor was quiet for a long moment. "She had an extraordinary voice." His own voice changed, just slightly, The way voices change when you're talking about something you actually miss rather than something you remember. The house had a completely different quality when she was in it. You knew her well. I knew the whole family. Before, he looked out the window. Antonio was my colleague and genuinely my friend. Elena, a pause. He gathered something. She was the kind of person who made the people around her more themselves. Does that make sense? Yes, Nora said. Gregor looked at her, held her gaze with the look of someone who has been watching for a particular thing for a very long time and has just seen it arrive. He'll make it difficult sometimes, he said. He doesn't know how not to. I know. He'll default to managing when he should be talking. He'll make unilateral choices and catch himself and overcorrect, and none of it will be graceful. I know that too. And you're still, Gregor. She wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. I sutured a knife wound by hand at 2 a.m. on a man who was upright and refusing anesthetic with 2 bodyguards in the room, and he didn't flinch once. She looked at him. I think I can handle difficult. He looked at her for one long moment. And then, the first time she'd seen it fully and without reservation, Gregor smiled, small, real. The smile of someone who has been waiting for a particular thing and has just seen it arrive exactly as expected. Antonio, he said, almost to himself. Would have liked you enormously. She was in the father's study when Adrian found her. She'd gone there alone. The older wing. The carved door. The key still in the lock. She realized he'd left it there since the first night Hetz brought her here. Like leaving a light on in a room so someone can find their way back to it. She sat in the chair opposite the desk, the photograph in its place, the letter opener, the bookshelves with their accumulated weight. She looked at the woman in the photograph, Elena Voss. Dark hair, one hand on her son's shoulder, the smile of someone who didn't know. She sang, Nora thought. The house was different when she was in it. She reached out and touched the frame. Gently, the way you touch things that belong to someone else's grief, but have somehow become adjacent to your own. She heard him in the doorway. Didn't turn. Didn't need to. I keep the key in the lock, he said. I noticed. I've never brought anyone here before. She looked at the photograph. I know, he came into the room. Didn't sit at the desk, his father's desk, which she understood he wouldn't use. Stood beside the bookshelf with one hand resting on the wood in the way people stand in rooms where something important happened. She'd have had questions, he said. My mother. If she could see. He paused. Questions and then tea without asking and then opinions. Strong opinions, absolutely intractable opinions. His voice was different in here. Not softer exactly. Unarmored. She thought my father was impossible and told him so constantly and loved him completely. He stopped. She would have. Would have what? A long pause. She would have liked you, he said. She would have liked that you're not afraid of me. I'm afraid of you. He looked at her. I told you that in Bay 4. She looked back at the photograph. I'm afraid of you the way you're afraid of something that matters. Not something dangerous. A beat. Or not only that, he was quiet. She turned and looked at him directly, the room between them. The preserved space with its ghosts and its key still in the lock. She would have wanted you to be happy, Nora said. His hand on the bookshelf. His face in the particular light of this room, older somehow. More honest, I don't have much practice with that, he said. I know. She stood. Neither do I. She picked up the photograph, held it for a moment, set it back exactly where it had been. But we have time. He looked at her. Nora, yes, I'm going to get this wrong sometimes. Probably. More than sometimes. Definitely, and I'm not going anywhere, she said. Clear. Simple. I said I was staying. I'm staying. He crossed the room, stopped in front of her, and moved with that deliberate, careful slowness she'd first noticed in his father's study. The way someone moves around things they don't want to break. He put his arms around her. Not urgently, not dramatically, just held on. The way you hold something you weren't entirely sure you'd get to keep. She put her hands against his back, felt the bandage under the fabric of his shirt, the wound still healing, the sutures still in place, 8 more days before they'd need to come out. You're not just closing something, child. You're making it hold. She pressed her cheek to his shoulder. Outside the window, the lake was going silver with the evening light. The maple trees at the property edge were well into their turning now, orange at the tips, working inward. The fountain in the circular drive was still going. The security teams moved their patient circuits, the house around them. His father's room, the preserved smell of old books and velvet, and something she couldn't name except as time, the long inhabitation of a place by people who loved it. She felt him breathe once, then again like someone remembering how. She left the next morning for her 7 a.m. shift. The gate opened without announcement. A car waited, not a command, just an offer, the driver having been told by Petra that Ms. Vane would decide for herself whether to use it or not. She used it, 42 minutes back through Westchester into the city. She watched the route the whole way, every turn. She always would, she suspected. The emergency brain, never fully off, her badge, her scrubs, the nurse's station at St. Cross that knew her name and her coffee preferences and which patients she'd follow up on and which ones she'd be thinking about on the ride home. Dr. Harmon at the counter. Vane, Bay 4, male, second-degree burns, right forearm. He's making it very dramatic. Noted. She picked up the chart. Anyone would be. She walked down the corridor, the antiseptic smell, the old coffee, the machine sounds in the PA system, and the particular noise place that never fully stops because it was built to never fully stop. Bay 4. She paused at the curtain, just for a moment. The specific beat a person standing at a threshold and being aware that they're standing at a threshold. Then she knocked twice on the metal frame. "Hi there," she said. "I'm Nora, your nurse tonight." And she pulled back the curtain and went to work, somewhere in Westchester, in a study that belonged to a man who'd built things from nothing and lost everything in a single night, and then spent 17 years building something different from the ruins. His son sat at the desk he never used, opened a drawer, took out a piece of paper, wrote one line at the top of it, not a target, not an operational document, not a calculation of any kind, a list, the kind you make when you're trying to remember what it is you actually want. When you've been operating so long in terms of what's necessary, and what's strategic, and what produces reliable outcomes, that you've lost the habit of asking the simpler question. He wrote one line, stopped, looked at it for a long time, put the pen down. And for the first time in 17 years, Adrian Voss didn't plan what came next. He simply waited because she'd said she was staying. And he'd decided, in Bay 4, in the space of 40 minutes and 7 sutures and a pair of hands doing work like they were making something hold, that he was going to learn to believe things like that. And at the time, starting now, outside, the day was very still. Morning light crossed it at the angle that made it look like hammered silver. The maple trees at the property's edge were turning in earnest now, orange at the tips, working inward toward the center of each leaf. Give it another week and the whole east side would be on fire with it. The fountain ran, the men walked their circuits, and in a hospital in Upper Manhattan, a nurse with steady hands knocked twice on the frame of Bay 4 and pulled back the curtain and went to work. The cut had been deep, but the sutures were holding.